So, George, tell us about the creature that you saw in this very swamp about 15 years ago.
It had eyes, just red, that sparkled like they were on fire. It was standing behind a tree about 36 inches in diameter, and he poked his head out. But before then, I'd had an eerie feeling like I was being watched. I had those features and everything was more like a human than any animal I've ever seen. The arms was a little bit longer than normal human being arms, but the legs were long and skinny also, along with the little body. It left a track, a three-pronged track. About the three prongs came out like a chicken foot, with the center toe longer.
Do you think you saw the lizard man?
It had a body maybe similar to a lizard, except for the head, and it didn't have any tail or anything like that, like a lizard. I didn't tell anybody for quite a while, because I know what people believe it. I think maybe I'd lost my mind, and I know that I'm truthful and honest, 100%. I'm a Christian. I go to church. I got a college education, 2 years of business college, and I know what I saw. It's in my mind. It's imprinted, and it'll be there when I die. At that time, I didn't know anything about that. It happened at other places nearby. People just didn't talk because they didn't know what it was.
Does it frustrate you that people don't believe you?
No, I don't care. Like I say, I know what the truth is, and nobody's ever dismayed me or tried to make me believe that I didn't see what I saw. Because I'll never forget it. It's an experience of a lifetime.
So, George, take me through exactly what happened that night.
Well, right around about certain time, about dark, good dark. Got on my bicycle, come down here and get some water. So I got the water. Then I hold up, looked out, seen something moving. Car flashes down there, it's something tall and dark. It's moving back further back in the swamp.
So then what did you do?
Well, I didn't hesitate. Hit me this way and I went my way. Hit me in the swamp and I went that way.
Did you look back?
No, I'm looking back. I'm going forward. I'm looking back.
What did you see?
Something tall, bridged up about 8 or 9 foot high, going back into the swamp.
So were you pretty shaken up?
Pretty shaken. Hair standing up, shaking, sweating, terrified.
Do you think what you saw is what people were saying was lizard man?
That had to be what it was.
Daniels tracked down another witness who saw the creature from a completely different vantage point.
Frank, can you just run us through what happened that day?
I fly a spray plane and I was loaded, and as I turned around at the end of my runway, made my run up as I always do. And there's a point of no return on my runway because there's trees at the far end. And just as I started to lift off, this creature just simply walked across in front of the plane. And I couldn't throttle back and stop and take another look because I couldn't stop because I was at the point. Okay? And so I did go on right and I'd make a turn and come back, but I never did see it again. But it was bigger than a human. Never seen a human this big. It walked with a kind of a hump or lope, had a hump on its back. Don't really know how to describe this, but kind of flat face, you know. But it did look right at me, you know, and turned its head and continued to walk across the runway. He walked almost like a human, but he had kind of a lope in his walk. He had a sort of a humpback, walked with his head forward, and he looked right straight at the airplane coming, and turned his head back towards the way he was walking and kept walking, and never saw him again.
Bishop Phil's bizarre string of lizard man sightings All began with 17-year-old Christopher Davis. It was 2 a.m. He had just finished changing a tire when something running on its hind legs suddenly jumped on his car. As Christopher tried to drive off, the monstrous creature started wrenching the door open, then jumped onto the roof of the car. Sounds like make-believe? He reported the strange encounter to the local sheriff's department.
As Lee County Sheriff, Liston Truesdale knew most of the citizens well. Did they really see this creature? And if they did, what does he think it was?
I think they're certainly telling the truth, and what they saw almost scared them to death.
Now, these people are not prone to exaggeration, are they?
With the experience I've had with law enforcement, you can tell when they're telling the truth. And what puts credibility to this case is the fact that they didn't come to us. All of them, we had to go to them. And when we asked them, well, why didn't you report it? And they said, well, I didn't want to be ridiculed by my peers.
So Lizard Man was very big news in this town. It must have had a huge impact on the town and on you.
Oh, yeah. They were making bets everywhere where we was going to catch it or what, or solve it, or what the problem was. So we sent for these people to come in, and Chris Davis's daddy brought him in first, and he was the first one to come in.
You actually gave Christopher Davis a polygraph test.
I think he was lucky to tell us anything, because it pretty near scared him to death. But he passed his lie detector test.
So does the lie detector test prove that Christopher Davis was telling the truth, that he saw a lizard man?
It proved that he saw something, yeah. We were going to hypnotize him and put him in a hypnosis, and but we never did it. And I'll be fair with you, I was glad to get rid of all this because it nearly worked us to death.
Now, you mentioned that he drew a picture of the creature. How did he describe it to you?
I couldn't believe what he was telling me. It was so far out. And I said, draw it. And he drew it. And we have the picture, the original drawing that he drew. The head looked like a human, but what amazed me was the 3 fingers and the toed feet. When he drew it, I said, is that what you saw? And he said, that's exactly what I saw. I know that people, his peers, gave him a hard time. They even nicknamed him the Lizard Man. But as I wind up saying this, that I can't prove that there was anything out there, and I can't prove that there wasn't.
So, what was the creature that haunted the people of Bishopville? Is it possible that there's some reptilian creature out there we don't know about? Some unknown and extremely rare reptoid hybrid? After all, Komodo dragons, the world's biggest lizards, were considered a fairy tale at one time too.
The human brainstem is often referred to as the reptilian brain because of its physical similarities, although they have very different functions. If Lizard Man is real, some cryptozoologists wonder what kind of abilities it has evolved.
There is one man who believes that a rare humanoid reptile could exist. Cryptozoologist John Rhodes. I've asked Dan and Nat to meet up with John to find out more about these bizarre reptilian creatures. According to John, It all goes back to the age of the dinosaur.
So what do you think these creatures are, and what can you ascertain about their abilities?
Well, considering the research that I've been doing over a number of years, it appears that these might just be natural extensions of our own Earth evolution, that they're just an extension of our own biology here on Earth that evolved perhaps parallel to mankind shortly before, or maybe even a long time before, we evolved into a sentient species.
So you think these creatures evolved from dinosaurs that weren't wiped out with the alleged meteor extinction?
They possibly could be. There's a very famous American paleontologist who did a study based on the morphological changes, or the changes in form, of a dinosaur 65 million years ago that was called Troodon. This dinosaur had a relatively large brain for its size. It had eyes that were coming from the side of its head more towards the front to allow it to see across, and has stereoscopic vision, gives it better predator skills. And he said, based on the changes that they had seen over a long period of time, where this dinosaur looked like in the past and where it was when they last had the evidence of its existence, if you had extrapolated that just a little bit further, where was it headed? And he said this thing would, if it had been allowed to evolve past the point 65 million years ago when the meteor, supposed meteor, came down to create all this devastation. And the model he came up with was strikingly similar to what was described in the accounts of Genesis, accounts of ancient history, as well as what people are reporting nowadays, a humanoid reptilian form, or a reptoid. These creatures may have actually evolved sentient intelligence before humans, and their technologies also would be perceived as more advanced than ours. Number one, because they'd have more time to work on it. Look where we've come in 100 years. I mean, we've gone from the buggy to going to other planets. And in addition to that, their physics that they would be utilizing in their technologies would appear to be magical or even extraterrestrial, because their brains are working differently than mammal brains. So perhaps their perceptions and their abilities to reach different intellectual levels are different than ours. So they would see things, and their technologies would be built differently. So what we're really looking at is a composite description from many people around the United States and also internationally that talk about beings that are anywhere from 6.5 to 7.5 feet tall. They have beaded skin like a lizard, or scaled skin like a serpent. They have the physical form of the humanoid. Usually they don't see any ears or anything. It could be just flat along the sides of their heads, or small pinholes. They have a very flat nose. They have eyes that are very almond-shaped with vertical slit pupils, which is very disturbing to people to see. They have sometimes ventricular ridges that go up over the sides of their heads, that sometimes they actually come off their heads by about 1/2 inch, and from an angle this must look like horns laying across the back of your skull. They have 3 fingers with an opposable thumb. Sometimes the claws can be long and sharp, sometimes they can be blunted almost like a dog's and dark colored. Their legs have been very well pronounced muscularly. They also have feet that have been seen to have 3 toes with a receded 4th up near where we would have an ankle. And some of them have been seen with tails, but most of the time they're seen without tails.
Humanoid reptiles? A definite kink in the evolutionary theory, my darlings. Cryptozoologist Richard Freeman has another explanation for lizard man.
So do you believe that these reptilian creatures that are attacking people aren't real flesh and blood creatures?
If you mean the so-called lizard men, no, I don't believe they're flesh and blood creatures. Nothing like that has ever existed in the fossil record, as far as we know. Nothing like that has ever existed today. A scientist, a paleontologist in fact, called Dr. Dale Russell, hypothesized in the late 70s that had certain types of small coelurosaur dinosaurs, such as Troodon, carried on evolving. If they hadn't become extinct at the end of the Cretaceous, they would have evolved into a humanoid type reptile that would have been at least as intelligent as human beings. But I think that is a rather Victorian view, rather narcissistic as well, modelling an animal on us. Now we know that evolution doesn't work that way. It isn't trying or striving to make things more intelligent. It's just adapting them to what is around at the time. A good example of this is sauropod dinosaurs, the large plant-eating dinosaurs. As they grew bigger, their necks grew longer, their hearts had to pump more and more blood up towards the brain. So they evolved smaller brains and became less intelligent because their necks became longer to allow them to browse on higher vegetation. So this idea of evolution always making things more intelligent is a very Victorian view and a wrong one.
What do you think these reptilian beings are, these lizard men?
Lizard men, I think, are a product of the human mind. You've only got to look in popular culture and media, and they're everywhere. We have the sea devils in the long-running science fiction serial Doctor Who. We have the villainous lizard in the Spider-Man comics. We have the reptilian creatures in the series V. They're everywhere. In legend, in culture, they're part of some very deep-rooted thing within humanity. You must remember that our primitive ancestors, around 3 million years ago on the plains of East Africa, the Australopithecines, the things that would have given them the most sleepless nights would have been crocodiles and large constricting snakes. So I think this fear of reptiles that a lot of people have is maybe a fossil memory, something inherited from our distant ancestors.
So how do you explain the lizard man encounters?
Maybe it was somebody in a costume, some sort of a hoax. Maybe it was a media exaggeration, maybe it was something genuinely paranormal.
Paranormal phenomenon? Some ancient peoples do believe in animal spirits that can materialize into earthly forms. Daniel and Natalie follow that lead to Whitewater in Wisconsin, where they're about to tour a strange burial ground covered with animal effigies, including some that resemble lizards.
I'm really interested in having a look at the lizard mound.
Yeah. So we're going to have a look. Some of these burial mounds were built over 1,000 years ago, and Nat and I are about to meet Linda Godfrey, an author who's been investigating these mounds and has some interesting theories. So Linda, tell us a little bit about these animal effigy mounds.
The animal effigy mounds are very special because they are found mostly in the southern half of Wisconsin, and mounds exactly like them are not found anywhere else in the world, really. And they're old. They were constructed between 300 and 1300 AD, so that they were probably made by the ancestors of a local tribe called the Ho-Chunk.
No one really knows very much about these mounds or why they were built. But one thing that is known is that there were thousands and thousands of them, and these people went to great trouble and labour to build them.
We have bird effigies, earth-type animals such as bear, panther, and deer, and then we have water spirits, which are generally considered spirit beings represented by turtles, lizards, and the mysterious water panther.
There's been some strange sightings of creatures like lizard men and things like that. You think there's a relation between these mounds and these strange sightings that people have been having?
It occurred to me that perhaps if these mounds represented spirit beings, perhaps that the Native Americans performed rites or had beliefs that these mounds could actually hold the spirit beings within them. And I began wondering if perhaps when all the settlers came and began plowing over these mounds, so many of them were destroyed or cut into. It used to be a popular Sunday afternoon activity to go and open an Indian mound, as they called it. That if these were indeed sacred containers for these spirit animals that perhaps were related to earth energies or earth spirits, that maybe it's like letting the genie out of the bottle, and that you have, therefore, from lizard mounds, you have lizard men, and from the bear and the panther mounds, you have these wolfish or ape-type beings that come out. And this is just my own fanciful theory. You know, I have to emphasize that. But it does tie into a lot of lore that I've been able to discover.
We're in a very sacred site here where ancient well, the ancestors of Native Americans possibly used to congregate here and perhaps used to bury their dead underneath these mounds. And they've used these mounds to symbolise different spirit animals to perhaps protect their dead. And maybe that's where Linda gets her idea that once these mounds are disturbed, that these spirits then become unleashed. And that's why we've got all these modern day sightings of half animal, half human creatures.
Well, that's right. It's a very spiritual place here. They used to, as you said, they used to congregate here. It was their church, it was their school, their meeting place. You know, they used to work out any problems they used to have and things like that. Celebrations were done here, lots of things. And they were possibly built as tributes to the spirits of the air and the earth and the water. And that's why they represent all these different animals. They've got the, you know, the lizard, the bird, the fish, the cougar and the panther. So they're a very spiritual place.
Do you think because Native Americans have been in touch with nature for thousands and thousands of years, they know more about the different energies given off by animals and plants, and they're aware of these energies more than we are, and because we've lost touch with that, we don't see them as they see them?
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, I think one of the other things that Linda was saying was the shamans actually used to create or manifest these spirits to protect these areas and then embody them in the mounds. And the theory is that when the mounds are disturbed, that these spirit creatures are then released, and then we have the modern day sightings. Whether that's true or not, it's a very good story, a good hypothesis anyway. I'm so glad we got to come and experience these mounds and actually see them for ourselves. You can definitely feel a presence here, an ancient presence.
A mystical creature? An unrecognized species? Of course, there are some who say reptoids like lizard men don't come from planet Earth at all. According to Mary Rodwell, an alien abductee counselor, there's only one explanation.
Can you tell us about some of the experiences people have had with reptilian beings?
It's quite interesting that there's an enormous number that do have encounters with what they believe are dinosaur, lizard-like reptilian beings, and it's again a global thing. Some of them are really scary because they seem to be very huge.
So can you describe these reptilian creatures that people are seeing?
Well, many of them seem to be about 6 or 7 feet tall, maybe even slightly bigger. Huge frame, snake-like eyes, big snake-like eyes, very overpowering kind of presence, a really sort of strong energy. Many of them, I say, feel really fearful of them. They may be a grey, green, or they describe sometimes different colours. But it seems to be the eyes that seem to be the most fearful part of these beings as well, sort of the big sort of snout here. Some of them have something that seems like a crown or skull scales that go down the back, which you know, some see those, some just see them as a flat back. Very much like one would expect a dinosaur that's evolved into a sentient, conscious creature may very well have evolved into.
Is there a typical encounter that people have with these reptilian creatures?
Typical in the sense that it goes with all contact experiences, that they may very well feel, wake up in bed not being unable to move, for example. They'll have a sense of a presence, an overwhelming presence of someone being in the room. And then for others it may be that they end up being on a craft and will see these creatures. They will have a deep understanding of the being that they've seen. They can describe how it felt to them. They would describe different shades of colour or how their eyes looked or the feeling that they got from that being. Hugely detailed, which for me gives it even more credibility as a real experience.
I guess that must be quite unnerving for a lot of these people. How do you help them deal with it?
It's absolutely terrifying for some of them, and they're left with post-traumatic stress disorder because of it. And that's why we know it is a reality, because you don't get those kinds of symptoms from someone who's having a fantasy or, you know, a hallucination. You would not be left with trauma that may last anything from 10, 20 or 30 years.